Appreciate everybody being here. Hit that like button. We got the great Devin Jackson in the green room. He's going to join us right now here on Birds 365. Read all his work at the Inquirer. He's done a great job covering and leading into the draft each year. Devin, great job down at the Combine, man. We appreciate you joining in today on a Thursday edition of Birds 365. How you doing, Devin?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on and talking NFL draft. And yeah, Combine as always was a blast to be there and be able to catch up with prospects and catch up with other people in the industry. But yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk to maybe Eagles draft plans and NFL draft prospects.
Yeah, good to have you back. Devin did a great job out at the Combine. I guess I'll start because the most obvious sort of position, I guess maybe the Eagles will be looking at it at 23 is offensive tackle. And I saw when you're out there, it seemed like the Eagles talked to every offensive tackle they could. So obviously they're very interested in doing their due diligence at that position. What do you think changed? I mean, the thing that stuck out to me, especially coming off the playoffs with Will Campbell and his struggles, which, people look at arm length and all of a sudden Spencer Fano has been that type of guy who's been a top 10 pick, and all of a sudden he's got small arms and short arms. And how much do you think that changes things? Does it change things, or is that kind of stuff overrated?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think some people will overcorrect a little bit, maybe in terms of arm length, and but I think in terms of offensive line wingspan, probably is the more accurate thing to look at because you got to be able to match some of what these edge rushers in the NFL are bringing in terms of athleticism and arm length and wingspan that they bring. But yeah, I think Fano, I think more so the conversation around him is, we know what he can do at tackle, but teams are interested at guard, interested in center. He was taking center snaps, after he did the combine, did the combine workout, and teams are interested in that department. And then you see teams like the Lions and Bears, they move on from their centers and now they're in the market for centers. So I think for Fano, it's more about his versatility and his ability to potentially play all five spots on the offensive line. Francis Maui Noah from Miami, kind of the same discussion. But yeah, I think coming out of the combine, I think they're, guys that, have more of the prototypical type of tackle, athleticism wise, size wise. I feel like those guys are coming out of the combine looking a little better than maybe a Fano or Maui Noah. But I think both Fano and Maui Noah are guys that probably going to be in the top 10, top 15 picks, and I'll be surprised if they make it anything past that. But in terms of the other tackles, Monroe Freeling, I feel like from Georgia, he's a guy that coming out of the combine, everyone seemed to have a lot of buzz about. He only has 16 career starts, but he's a guy that I think coming out of it probably is going to be a top 10, top 15 pick, just because guys like that, his size, his athleticism. I think he ran like a 4.9 340, at the combine. Freakish athleticism. I know he struggled a little bit in the on field drills, but in terms of what you're looking for and prototypical left tackle, he checks all those boxes. So, coming out of the combine, I think those three guys, Maui Noah, Fano, and Freeling, are guys that maybe are going to go a little bit higher than even we expect. But, in the next tier of offensive linemen or tackles, I think, Vanga Ioane from Penn State, he's probably, up there in terms of being taken inside the top 20. But then after that, I think it's kind of a crapshoot, and I think that's kind of what works in the Eagles' favor. And you have a guy like Caden Proctor from Alabama, Blake Miller from Clemson, Maxie Honachor from Arizona State. Those guys, I feel like, are all going to be in the range for the Eagles to take at 23.
We just a real quick follow up on that, Devin. We all think there's going to be at least a little shift in how the Eagles evaluate offensive linemen moving to this outside zone stretch scheme, which is sort of, lateral before you as opposed to the more physical, get up the field, vertical, Jeff Stoutland approach. The guys like Freeling, guys like Miller, are those the athletes that maybe they might gear towards? Is it fair to say they're a little bit more athletic and maybe they went to more of the power prospect in the past, or did you not get that feel out there?
Yeah, I think they would certainly, match exactly what you're looking for in terms of the movement ability. I think Freeling specifically is a guy that at Georgia he was asked to do block a lot in space. Pull out in space and block on screens and all those different things. So Freeling specifically, I feel like is a guy that has a lot of experience already doing so in the Georgia system. Miller, I think, is kind of in that similar vein where they asked him to do a lot in space too. So I could see both of those guys kind of match. If you decide to go more of the outside zone scheme, um, you know, route in terms of run scheme, I think they make a lot of sense. But I also think both those guys are tackle only prospects too. I don't think they're guys that you can necessarily move in the interior or can play guard at the NFL level. So I think that would be kind of the caveat with those two players.
Devin, we had Ian Cummings on earlier this week, another great draft guy. He explained the draft as kind of a bell curve in that he felt like the most of the value was kind of in those middle rounds. And there's a lot of, while there might not be as many blue chips this year, there is a lot of great starters. Would you agree with that? And how do you kind of see the overall board for the Eagles and or just NFL in general, and where teams can kind of get the most value out of the draft this year?
Yeah, I think you're going to get a lot of value on day two of the draft just because I feel like you're gonna. I think in the top 10, top 15 picks, there's kind of a set amount of players you kind of expect to go in that range. But I think it's going to get interesting coming out of the combine. Obviously because one, I think it depends on when does Ty Simpson, QB2, when does he go? Does he go in the first round? Does he go like middle first round, late first round? I think
Yeah.
that will be a big determining factor because if he does end up going like the middle or late first round, then you're going to have a bunch of players that probably shouldn't be there that are going to be on the board. Just because the quarterbacks got pushed up just a tiny bit in terms of like Mendoza's going to go number one, but then Simpson, the question of where he goes, I think is going to make kind of an interesting debate. But yeah, then after that, I think when you look at in terms of the depth of the defensive line class, the depth of the cornerback class, the safety class, those three positions specifically, have a lot of really strong and talented players that can come in and start, even if they're taken in round two or round three. Then you go to other positions like tight end is a little bit more backloaded. Bianchi and Sadiq going in the first round. Eli Stowers for Vanderbilt had a really strong testing day, and maybe he goes a little bit earlier than we expect. Probably not first round, but maybe sometime early in round two. But I think after him, you get a little bucket of players that are potential stars or potential role players, and then the receiver class is always going to be strong. They're always going to have a lot of depth in a receiver class, and especially on day two. I think maybe you get 5 or 6 receivers going round one, but after that you can maybe get in the double digits wide receiver on day two. So yeah, I would agree that this class you're going to have your set amount, maybe 10, 15 guys that seem to always pop up in first round mocks, but really after I think you get out of the top half of the draft, it gets a little interesting. It depends on what people are preferring or teams are preferring in terms of who might go next. But after round one finishes, there's a chance that guys, people expect to go on round one or there and on day two. And all of a sudden you have a big run of really talented players that, probably shouldn't have been there, end up being there. So yeah, I think this is the type of draft where, the premium positions aren't as strong at the top and some non-premium positions like linebacker and safety, and obviously the tight end and King Sadiq. You're going to see a little bit of a different type of draft, I think, than years past.
Devin, a position we haven't talked about that much here, and I want to kind of pick your brain on it, the D-backs from the standpoint of, I think we all kind of assume the Eagles are going to, because of what they've done recently, is just draft defense, premium picks. it's going to shift a little bit toward the offense. And I do think that will happen. But, when you start projecting the Eagles need help at cornerback too, they could potentially need help at safety if Reed Blankenship leaves in free agency. Seemed like from your work out there, they were looking at a bunch of prospects maybe in that range, that mid-round range. Anybody stand out to you that could be a fit that maybe have some upside?
Yeah, for cornerback, was just finishing watching up Julian Neal from Arkansas last night, and I think he matches a lot of what the Eagles are looking for in corner. He's some nice length, ability to close on the football and zone and man coverages. Challenges receivers at the line of scrimmage. Does a really nice job, breaking up passes at the catch point, and he ran pretty well too for a guy that I think it was like 6'2" in the 200-pound area. Ran like a 4.49 40. Tested really well in explosive jumps. I think he has 7.19 or 7.13 three cone and like a 4.2 20-yard dash. So guy that has a pretty decent change of direction for a guy his size. But he checks a lot of the boxes I think that the Eagles are looking for in terms of maybe like a day 2 corner. So I think his range is more so in the round 3 areas. So maybe one of the 2 third-rounders that the Eagles have, he will make a lot of sense. But yeah, I really like his game, what he brings to the table. And then when you look at day 2 in general, I think it just kind of depends on who's there, who's not in terms of the cornerback class. I think because of the need for cornerback stars across the NFL, you're going to see a lot of guys just kind of fly off the board a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see, if, in round 1, do the Eagles end up with another Jahad Campbell case? And if a guy like Jamar McCoy is falling, a guy that, a lot of people are expecting to go in the top 10, top 15, does he intrigue the Eagles if the Eagles decide to maybe trade back and he's still there? So I think it's going to be kind of a watch and see process for the Eagles. Obviously, I know they met with Avion Terrell, but he's probably going to be out of their range after what he did at the combine and just what people feel about him around the league. But I keep an eye on a guy like Jermon McCoy from Tennessee that expected to go in the top 10, top 15 pretty much the entire cycle. Doesn't go and test at the combine, waiting for his pro day. He's been out for a full year. I think he's a guy to me that the Eagles are always looking for guys that maybe other teams aren't valuing as high. And say if all the offensive linemen that they want in round 1 are gone, do you decide to take a guy like McCoy that clearly has a lot of talent, clearly is viewed highly in the league, but the big question marks if he's still the same explosive player he was pre-injury.
Going to be interesting to see. Devin, tight end, man. I think it's interesting. The Eagles right now, they got really nobody under contract. They got a couple lower level guys that could be depth pieces. But if Goddard walks, the Eagles are going to be in a position here where they got to get some tight ends. Now, I know you mentioned Kenyon Sadiq in round 1. I don't really think the Eagles would go that route. Where's the value for them in 2, 3, 4? Who do you like tight ends in that area where the Eagles could try and pick up some guys?
Yeah, I think Max Klare from Ohio State, obviously is a guy that is connected to the Eagles quite a bit, and he's extremely talented pass catcher, decent run blocker, someone that clearly would fit more so the Goddard role where he's coming in and immediately being that receiving threat with some potential to be a long-term blocker. So he makes a lot of sense for the Eagles. I will look at NC State's Justin Joly, someone that I really like throughout this process. Look good at the Senior Bowl, look good on his tape. Really athletic player, more so kind of that move tight end where you're not going to ask him to do a lot of in-line things, but he's a really good receiving tight end. Has some good athleticism. Looked really good while he was down at the combine. So he would certainly make a lot of sense. And then, of course, Georgia's Oscar Delp, kind of in that same vein where extremely athletic player. They asked him to block a ton, and he does a really nice job when he's blocking linebackers, safeties, corners, not so much defensive ends. But again, I think he's another player that will make a lot of sense for what the Eagles are trying to look for in terms of athleticism wise. And I think he fits more of more what they traditionally look for, in terms of that position. But I think the player that interests me the most is Nate or Berkshire, the Texas A&M tight end who, it was coached by Jamal Singleton at the Senior Bowl. A guy that has a little bit more traditional tight end skills. I think he's probably more in the third, fourth round range. But I think in terms of a guy that has some receiving outside, but mostly focus a little bit more on the blocking aspects of things. I think he will make a lot of sense to kind of be your tight end two, to kind of pair him up with probably more so a free agent type of player versus being like that true tight end one. But I like Berkshire, as a player that can come in and handle some of those blocking duties that the Eagles may be looking for from the tight end position. So to me, those guys stood out. I think if you're looking more of the blocking type, I think Will Kasmerick, the other Ohio State tight ends, probably more of that O'Keefe, straight blocking tight end. Someone that probably isn't going to go out for routes a ton, but enjoys and really relishes the blocking role. And then kind of the other position I'm looking at too is fullback. Could the Eagles be looking more into that fullback position? If they do a little bit more under center, if they do a little bit more of the Shanahan McVay type of run sets where they are asking the tight end or asking a fullback to kind of be a part of that process, and two guys that kind of fit that bill or Riley Nowakowski from Indiana and Max Bredesen from Michigan. Bredesen, I think particularly is interesting because he was listed as a tight end at Michigan, but you truly play more of that fullback role. And for Nowakowski, kind of in the same way for Indiana, kind of that utility H-back guy that can make a lot of sense at fullback. So for tight end, for me, I would look in a couple of buckets, and you have your receiving guys, your more inline blocking guys, and then I will even suggest fullback as a potential too.
Just one more at tight end I want to get your thoughts on, and that's the kid from Stanford, Sam Roush, because I mean, I do think the Eagles are going to go more, more of that. I hate to throw out the name, but that the ceiling is you want somebody like George Kittle who can do both. But from the perspective of just being that inline tight end, and I don't know what he measured at, but certainly he was coming in. He's like 6'6", 260 or something. So big dude. Does that translate on the field, or is it not? Because sometimes you got big guys who aren't physical.
Yeah, it does translate on the field. I think he's a guy that, I think the Eagles will have circled in terms of like, this is a guy that they want, to be kind of that, developmental, can do some things as a receiver, certainly be kind of that guy. But he also is a really nasty run blocker too. He's not just, a guy that's all about receiving. And, obviously Stanford known for, developing tight ends back in the day and what they're able to do. It's been a little bit since that's happened, but yeah, he's a physical player. A guy that, has some good route pacing. They do a lot of insert blocks with him at Stanford, and just what he was able to do in blocking defensive linemen, defensive ends. He would check all the boxes in terms of, guy that, isn't going to be a burner in terms of the tight end position, but if you need him to work double team blocks, to kind of insert up to linebackers, kind of wall off defensive ends, while also making some nice catches over the middle of the field. Roush probably is kind of your great mix of all those things, especially as a day two player. But yeah, I like Sam Roush a lot, and coming off of the combine, where he tested extremely well for his size. He was 6'6", 267. He I believe he ran like a 4.7 40 or just under 4.7. Has some good jumps. So yeah, the athleticism clearly pops with Roush, and he's a guy that I think makes a lot of sense if you are going for the combo guy where he's a really solid, strong blocker. Can do some things over the middle of the field. I think Roush is probably your best bet in the middle rounds.
How about wide receiver, Devin? I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with A.J. Brown, but I think they're making a pick at wide receiver somewhere anyway. Where's the value? Who do you like? A name I keep hearing that's good value, at least this was pre-combine, was Chris Bell, as maybe a good replacement for A.J. or a potential replacement. Where do you see the value at wide receiver in this draft?
Yeah, the value to me is rounds 2 and 3, just because I feel like you're gonna have your top end guys go early. Obviously you look at Cardinal Tate, Jordan Tyson, players like that that they're probably gonna go early in the draft, and maybe the late run in those 20s to Casey Concepcion, Denzel Boston, Omar Cooper Jr. has been getting a lot of round 1 buzz coming out of the combine. But yeah, on day 2, I think it really depends on the type of receiver you're looking for. If you're looking for more kind of complementary guys that fit, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith's skill set. I look at guys like Clemson's Antonio Williams as a player that makes a lot of sense. Alabama's Jeremy Bernard. I think those guys are kind of have that inside out ability. Can play all over the formation. Has some speed. Has some yards after catch ability. So I think they will make a lot of sense if you want to go that route. But if you're going like you need to replace AJ, certainly you want to do it in round 1. And I think Casey Concepcion probably makes a lot of sense to start to kind of fill that role that AJ Brown left behind, and what he's able to do. Jordan Tyson, I think, is a guy that his everything that coming out of the combine says his medicals are clean, but he has missed quite a few games over the last 2 years, and that could scare some teams off. And maybe he's a guy that's available in the 20s by the time the Eagles are picking. So I keep an eye on him if AJ is traded. But yeah, on day 2 and day 3, I'd be looking for guys that probably more complementary skill sets that aren't necessarily guys that need to demand 7-8 touches a game, but maybe 3 to 4. Have the speed to maybe take the top off the defense. So I think those guys make a lot of sense in terms of what you're looking for. Deion Burks from Oklahoma, another speedy guy that probably will play more of the slot role for the Eagles if he gets drafted there. But yeah, I would look. The third receiver. I think you want a guy that's a little bit more versatile. Obviously, that can bring some run blocking elements too. Because we know this new system could really accentuate run blocking from receivers a little bit more, and I think Bernard and Williams kind of bring that ability.
Everybody loves quarterbacks, maybe not in this draft. You mentioned the top 2. Mendoza's obviously going to go number 1 overall. Ty Simpson's probably going to go in the first round because quarterbacks get pushed up the board. There is some thought the Eagles might spin off Tanner McKee. A lot of hype about the New York Jets potentially being interested. The problem there is you need a backup. So my question to you is, I think I know the answer. I think it would be Garrett Nussmeier, but who amongst the next group is most ready to be an NFL backup right now? And then if you can't get one of those guys, who do you think is the best day 3 dart throw at the quarterback position?
Yeah, so I think when you're looking at kind of the what you talked about and personality wise, I think that matters. In terms of like, do you have the ability to understand like maybe it's not your time to start at this current juncture of your career, and are you okay being able to be a backup? So I think if you're looking for a guy that kind of 2 guys to me fit kind of that mantra, I think Carson Beck from Miami makes a lot of sense as just a backup player where, maybe the arm juice isn't there for him in terms of like, some of the other top quarterbacks in this class, but the experience is there. He played a lot of games, played in a lot of high profile games, and, a player that, is gone through change, was at Georgia, then went to Miami, won a lot of games between those 2. Kay Klubnik from Clemson, multi-year starter, a guy that, comes to a program that the Eagles love to draft players from, one. but two, a player that's won a lot of games, that competitive, has some athleticism, has a decent strong arm. I think he will make a lot of sense too. If you're going to go the day two route, so I'll look at Beck and Klubnik. On day three, I mean, I think Taylor Green makes a lot of sense in terms of being a developmental guy. I think he's a couple years away from truly being like backup ready. And in terms of ready to start an NFL game, but he has the tools to be able to develop. Really really strong arm, athleticism really pops. He had awesome combine in terms of his athleticism, and just a guy that kind of way in the wings, but I don't think he'd be ready to be a backup next year. Um, Another guy I'll shout is Cole Payton from North Dakota State. Obviously, North Dakota State. I know Eagles fans
Yeah.
are happy to hear a quarterback from that school, but Cole Payton is only started 1 year in North Dakota State, and left-handed quarterback. Extremely athletic. A really really strong arm. Someone that can attack all areas of the field. Had a really good Senior Bowl too. So I really like him as a day three developmental player, where you spend some time developing him, and maybe he turns out into a really strong backup. So yeah, I will look at those guys. I know other names have been thrown around. Guys like Drew Aller, obviously Garrett Nussmeier, people like that. But I think those two guys would be a little bit more difficult to have as a backup, just because I feel like they're guys that have talent to push as a starter, and maybe you don't want that type of personality in the room where you know I don't see a threat to be a starter, but also kind of the noise around it. I think you have to be ready for that potential, especially with Nussmeier and Aller being guys that coming into the season were expected to maybe crack the first round, and maybe potential stars in the NFL. So I will probably go the latter route, where K Klubnik makes a lot of sense. Players like that, Carson Beck, Cole Payton, Taylor Green. I will shout out those guys.
Devin, sitting at 23, if you're Howie Roseman, I know this changes based on the way the board falls. You moving up, you moving down, you staying put. What's Howie doing in round one this year, Devin?
I think moving up. I think there's gonna be someone that is falling down the board a little bit, and I just have a feeling that how he was going to get aggressive in trying to address a premium position. So I think we're also got to keep in mind what happens with Jaelan Phillips, and what whether he resigns or not. But if he doesn't, there's going to be a pretty decent need at edge rusher. So I think that there's an offensive lineman, like a Spencer Fano, if he starts to slip a little bit down the board, I could see the Eagles being interested in taking him, with his, guard tackle flexibility, and he's a really good player too. So I would probably guess trade up more than trade back, just because their teams that are picking behind them also have a lot of similar needs, so I'd be a little worried of that. You look at the Bills, say if, like for instance, if AJ Brown does get traded, Bills are also looking for a receiver behind them. Browns are also looking for a receiver behind them, and if you're looking at offensive line, Browns might be looking for offensive line if they go, non-offensive line and pick number 6. Texans are going to be looking for a ton of offensive linemen. They just traded one earlier this week. So I think you have to be careful when you're trading back in the first round, because a lot of those teams are tend to have similar needs that you have. You don't want to be in a position where you pick behind them, and they take the guy that you want. And just naturally, I feel like Howie gets a little more aggressive when the picks get closer to him. So I think I would expect more of a move up in the first round versus moving back.
That's definitely been Howie's recent history. Make sure you follow Devin on the X platform, real D_Jackson. Read him at Inquirer.com. Does a tremendous job there covering the NFL draft with an Eagles tint to it. You mentioned edge rushers there. You're right. You need those. You need those plans, those backup plans if things don't go right. So we all know they want to keep Jaelan Phillips, but they're going to have walk away number. If that happens, who's that guy? Who's he going up to get? Do you think? Who do you think is in that? I don't want to say top 10. I don't think they're going up that high, but if you go from 23 to say 15, who fits that category, or does anybody?
I think Keldric Faulk probably is the only guy that really fits that category, only because I feel like David Bailey and Ruben Bain are both going to be gone, in the top 7, top 8 picks. But yeah, Keldric Faulk, kind of nailing down his stock has been, kind of a difficult one because he's a really talented run defender, only 20 years old, like 6'6", 285, has some pretty good athleticism for his size. They played him a little bit all over the formation, some 3 tech, some 4-eye, some 5 tech, coming off the edge. He clearly has a lot of juice, but he also kind of matches the first round edge rushers we've seen over the last few years, like Michael Williams, like Shamar Stewart, where they're not exactly, pass rush specialists, but they're athletic specimen. And, Howie Roseman's, motto has always been getting freakish athletic guys, especially in the first round. And, again, if he's a guy that, and really, I think there was a disconnect a little bit between the league and just, draft Twitter, draft media that, Keldric Faulk is really, thought of like top 10, top 15 player in this class in league circles. But, who wants to take that dart on him? And if you're, trade up to 15, there's a good chance that he's there, especially, you think about, who could go early, obviously 2 linebackers and Sonny Styles and Arvo Reese. You got David Bailey and Ruben Bain. Got a receiver position that could have a couple guys go. Jeremiah Love can go. Obviously, Fernando Mendoza can go. That's like 9 players right there. There's not enough picks there. And then the DBs could go early too, especially with the Chiefs now needing a DB. Obviously, the Dolphins and Cowboys all needing a DB. All of a sudden, you get down to 13, 14, 15. There's not, Keldric Faulk still might be around there. So I think, if you're looking for an edge rusher to trade up for in this draft class, I think Keldric Faulk, checks a lot of those boxes. Bigger defensive end. A guy that I think, if the Eagles don't bring back Brandon Graham, he can play a lot of those roles that Brandon Graham played, over his career and really over the last season or so. I think Faulk would make a lot of sense if you're trading up for an edge rusher.
Good stuff. Devin Jackson joining us here on Birds 365. Read all his work at the Inquirer. Devin did a great job down at the NFL Combine. You can follow him on X. It's at @RealD_Jackson. Devin, thanks for joining today, brother. We appreciate you doing it. We'll be hoping to talk to you again before the draft. Still, what do we got? 6 weeks, I think, about Devin, 6 or 7 weeks until the NFL draft. So it's ramping up. Draft season is here. We appreciate you doing it today, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Xander and John. I appreciate you.
Thank you, man.
Jackson joining us right here on Birds 365. Johnny Mac, great show today. Great interview there with Devin. I love draft season, John, and I love free agency season. And the new league year is now officially just about upon us, Johnny Mac, and things are really starting to ramp up for the 2026 season. John, I see people in the chat talking right now. We're going to win 7 games next year.
Wow. No, I don't agree with that.
I don't either.
Yeah, come on. There's, again, the Eagles didn't win 5 games. They may act like it, but they won 11 games.
They won 11, but they were close on a couple. I think that's
they got a lot of good players on this team. They got more good players than most teams in this league, and that's not going to change. Even if they trade AJ Brown, and even if they don't re-sign Jaelan Phillips, they're still going to have more good players than most teams in this league. So you're starting from a position of strength, and then you got to make some good decisions in free agency and the draft, and then you'll talk about whether they're just a 9-10 win team or a Super Bowl contender. That'll be that. But yeah, they're not a 7-win team, barring catastrophic injuries. No way. Come on.
No, I don't see it either. John, would you make a Devin's breakdown of the draft there, man? It's gonna be an interesting draft. There's always good storylines in every draft. You know, they're all obviously not all the same. But what's sticking out about this class so far to you as we get a little closer?
Well, you're starting to hone in on where you think the Eagles are going to go, and that can change after free agency, and it will change after free agency. But, obviously they did a ton of work looking at the tackles or the tackle guard versatility guys at the combine. I was surprised how much they looked at sort of the mid-range of defensive backs. I don't think they're going defensive back at the top. Unless something like Devin said and all the tackles are gone and things like that. Phillips changes things dramatically if they don't give him back. So I thought it was interesting his take on Keldric Faulk, who I've heard the same thing. I think he's liked by NFL people more than I think draft Twitter has caught on to yet. And I think he's kind of a, if you're going up to 15 to get him though, or somewhere in that range, boy, that would be a bit of a. I wouldn't mind him at 23, but I don't know if I'd go up and get him. But I do think he's a possibility. Whereas you see, like Messidor probably gets more hype with draft Twitter, and I meant to ask him about Messidor, but I think he's a guy that. He's older prospect. He's a high risk prospect. He's not an Eagles guy to me. Too high risk. Whereas I think Devin hit the nail on the head. Somebody like Faulk, that's what the Eagles look for, the athletic freak, and especially in the first round. They want that difference making from just a physical standpoint. But that's only in the equation if they don't get Jaelan Phillips back in free agency. The one guy I've fallen in love with and I didn't get to because safety's not really all that relevant for the Eagles, even though it could be if they don't get Reed Blankenship back, but they've never taken a safety in the first round. That kid from Oregon, man. I watched some of him. I love that kid. Dylan.
Yeah,
Deneman, yeah.
He's a really good player.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a big time player. I don't think they take him at 23, and I do think they're going to go offense. I think they almost have to go offense, but anyway, those are some of my recent thoughts about the draft.
Good stuff, Johnny Mac. Couple minutes left here to go on the show, and make sure we got all of our super chats done. I want to thank everybody for being here today. You stirred them up a little bit today, John, with the TO talk. But we had a good draft conversation, a good cap conversation in hour number one.
Now I'm interested. By the way, if AJ stays and everything turns out to be fine, and he's still one of you as the Eagles fans, does he all of a sudden become better? Is this support? Is this sort of setting up for is what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I know what you're trying to say. It's they're loyal to only who's here. They think AJ's gone, so now they've turned on him. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. Because this guy has been a big time player for 4 years, not 1 year, for 4 years, a big time player. And I guess some people would say it wasn't last year, but 3 All-Pros, 2 Super Bowls, Super Bowl championship. Why are we having this discussion? Why is that even remotely controversial?
John, we will see what happens, my friend. There's a lot going on in Eagle Land. I can't believe it. We got people in the chat. I saw one saying we got 5 wins, 6 wins, 7 wins until they see the roster. I'll tell you what, I don't know what the right word is for this, John, but it feels like the ceiling and the floor this year are a lot different than what they've been before. I still think the ceiling is there, but it does feel like the floor is lower this year.
I agree with that. The floor is lower, but it's not 7 wins.
No, I
5 wins. I think it goes down to, 8 and 9 would be a catastrophe. I think that's probably your floor.
What's the least? The least in Sirianni's era is 9, right? That was year 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Jalen Rager, and I mean, come on, it's just different team.
But you got a very young coaching staff who hasn't done it. You still have that defense though to lean on. Now it could go in a negative direction if you lose Jaelan Phillips and Reed Blankenship and Nakobe Dean. But Vic's going to figure something out. I honestly, and I love Nakobe Dean, but I think Jihad's going to be a better player. Overall, maybe not the same in run support, but I think overall he's going to be a better player. Safety to be determined, and obviously edge is a big problem.
That run support's something to keep an eye on, though, isn't it? I mean, I think Nakobe's really freaking good at that. If he's out of there, can Jihad handle that as well? Now, maybe the other stuff is more important, but stopping the run is still a big part of the game.
Yeah, but I think they'll be fine because Zach Bowen's really good at it, and I think maybe it puts more pressure on him a little bit, and maybe that takes away from his big play ability. But I think he'd be fine.
Yeah, we'll see.
People forget the first 6 games of the season when Jihad was going to be NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year.
It's true. It's true. All right, J-Mac, your final thoughts here on a Thursday edition of Birds 365.
Yeah, I set off a unneeded fire, but that's my belief. A.J. Brown.
Sometimes you need those, John, in the offseason.
A.J. Brown is the best receiver the Eagles have ever had. That is my belief. That is my belief.
I don't know if that was the gripe. I think the gripe was more about the big picture, about overall, you think. About your thoughts overall on T.O.
Well, overall, I think T.O.'s overrated because people put T.O. Like I've heard a lot of people put T.O. Most people acknowledge Jerry Rice is number 1. And that's I've heard some people argue that T.O.'s better than Randy Moss. And I'm like,
that's not.
I mean, I don't think they watched the era of football.
But overall, do you have AJ better than T.O. to clarify here?
At this stage, yes. I mean, obviously longevity. When you talk about Hall of Fame, like Tommy McDonald, Tommy McDonald and Harold Carmichael are in the Hall of Fame. They're in the Hall of Fame. There's a longevity part of it. If AJ Brown never plays again, he's not making a Hall of Fame. However, he's on a Hall of Fame trajectory. If his career continues 5 more years at this level or similar level, he's going to be a Hall of Fame player, and everybody will acknowledge, he's better than Tommy McDonald and Harold Carmichael. It's all projection at this point. They're already there. But in the moment, like I say about Aaron Rodgers playing the quarterback position, who has played the wide receiver position at a higher level for the Philadelphia Eagles than A.J. Brown? Not taking out the longevity, that remains to be seen. Anything can happen.
That's
who
fair.
In the moment has played the position better than A.J. Brown? Nobody. And it's revisionist history to talk about. And T.O. was great in that season. But I mean, comparatively to A.J., other than the touchdowns, which are a big thing, but I think you saw it this year with Dallas Goedert with 13 touchdowns. I mean, that's not something you judge people on, other than he's a good red zone receiver.
All right, final question, and it's different than T.O. Jerry or Randy?
Jerry's the best of all time. I think Randy, is the most gifted of all time. But Jerry, performance wins out in the end. I think Randy was more talented, but Jerry did what Jerry did. So Jerry's number 1. You could argue Jerry Rice is the best football player, regardless of position.
That's true. There is a strong argument to be made for that. All right, John, great show today, my man. I appreciate you doing it. As always, a good Thursday edition, and we will talk to you tomorrow for a Friday edition of Birds 365, the last Friday before we have some major potential sweeping changes to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, who knows? It might happen today. Who knows? Who knows?
Ooh, are you talking the Phillips extension?
No, I'm not doing an Adam Schefter thing. I'm not.
All right, so what are you thinking, though? When you say that, what do you mean?
That shit's happening all around the league.
All right, that's fair. All right, you don't want to give us anything. All right. John, good show, man. Talk to you tomorrow.
All right, see ya.
All right, thanks, Johnny Mac. There's John McMullen joining us right here on Birds 365. Follow him at JF McMullen. A good show today. I like the hour number one combo too on the cap stuff and the all that stuff is interesting to me and how the Eagles handle it. So I thought that was a good conversation. I thought the NFL conversation was good when it comes to the moves made around the league and the trade for Trent McDuffie.